Let's go!
The big thing that I wanted to quickly talk about is that we have a much better idea when Street Fighter 6 is going to be coming out. For anybody that is unaware of the situation, Capcom publicly makes available, because I believe they're a publicly traded company, they have to make a lot of this information public about when their sales expectations are going up, what their sales expectations are, how much games have sold, how good Capcom is doing, like yada, yada, yada. All this investor stuff, you know? Now, this investor stuff is very important because it can be a direct sort of lens into what Capcom's plans are in the future. And usually in this shareholder stuff, they go directly over that, like what their plans are moving forward, the fact that their PC market is huge, like all this kind of stuff. How is this relevant to Street Fighter 6? Because we've all been debating when the heck Street Fighter 6 is going to come out. It feels like the game is nearly done, right? We have been playing betas of this game that have essentially shown us that game looks to be in a pretty good state. Then maybe they're just ready to release this shit, you know? Probably not. And it's unfortunate because there has been a tried and true method of release of most Capcom fighting games, especially the Capcom fighting games that are Street Fighter in main title. And for anybody that's unfamiliar with that, the history of Street Fighter fighting games from Street Fighter 4 era all the way until pretty much now, every single one gets released in February. Street Fighter Cross Tekken, Street Fighter 4, Street Fighter 5, like almost all of their big fighting games. MVCI was a big difference. These games get released in February, usually around Valentine's Day in February. The same also applies to Marvel vs. Capcom 3, launched in February of 2011. The difference is that Capcom is a much different company now, and the way they evaluate their shareholder information, much less when games are released, has sort of been all over the place. That things can take up different time frames because we're obviously in a post-pandemic environment now where it's not completely gone, but it's at the point where a lot of games are catching up to this point. And we got our first really big understanding of when Capcom's next big release of Street Fighter 6 could possibly be based on this information. So consumer strategies from this year, and I'll explain to you guys what fiscal means, and it's very relevant to Japanese business. So Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak was one of the big games that came out this year. It was an expansion to Rise, and it launched in June. The plan for this year in the last consumer report, right, the last report that they had for investors, was they were to release multiple major new titles this year that were not Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak or expansions like the Resident Evil DLC that's about to come out. So this was from before. And before it was like, oh shit, fiscal year means April 1st. For anybody that is like, that sounds weird, but it's actually true. In Japan, their business sortings put the entirety of 2022 ending on April 1st. And that's when, or March 31st, technically, that's when their 2022 ends. So right at the beginning of April is when technically 2023 begins in terms of Japanese business. It was pretty obvious that RE4 is one of these major titles, right? RE4 is a game that is going to be considered a major new title. We didn't know exactly when the release date was, but we got it, and it's, you know, March. So that is hitting fiscal 2022. Cool. That's still left in the air. So when Street Fighter 6, like we've known about Street Fighter 6 since like the beginning of this year, when is Street Fighter 6 going to eventually land? And considering that it was saying multiple new titles, hey, there's a very good chance that it's gonna drop in February, which is the same time frame that all the other Street Fighter games and big Capcom fighting games usually drop. The February time frame usually leads to some pretty good sales. So it's like, oh, cool. That's going to be their other major new title in 2022. Flash forward to today. Y'all with me? Y'all keeping notes? Flash forward to today. Going forward, the company will work to achieve full year guidance through measures such as the release of a major new title in the second half of the fiscal year. Meaning that release of a singular major new title. Now, what is that singular major new title? Well, it's the only one with a confirmed release date. That is Resident Evil 4 Remake. 100%. Their major new title is already got a release date, and the only other games that have been even announced, much less could potentially have release dates, are like Dragon's Dogma, no Pragmata, no Exoprimal, like no Street Fighter 6. This is absolutely the one that's actually been announced, RE4 Remake. So what does that mean for Street Fighter 6? It means Street Fighter 6 is not coming out till 2023 fiscal. It means that Street Fighter 6 is potentially coming out a lot later than we were expecting. And who knows when it's going to eventually drop in the fiscal year of 2023, but it's not going to be January, February, or March. The earliest it could possibly be is sometime in April, but Capcom releasing another major title within a month is about the longest time frame it could be. It could be somewhere near the end of April. That is a absolute possibility. Now here's the thing, that's disappointing because once again, you're gonna have to wait even longer, right? They announced the game in what, February of 2023, and then it wouldn't come out until like another year and potentially like 3 months or something like that. It could be a long time. Capcom has also never launched a large-scale fighting game in the HD era in that time frame. I think everything that has ever been released from Capcom does not usually drop in like a late spring to early summer time frame. They've never done it, which is interesting that it could be dropping around that area. Is this disappointing? Yeah, sure. I would like to say that it would be great to be playing Street Fighter 6 around February. That would be great. But at the same time, Street Fighter 6 has already gone through a hefty handful of delays. We already got some insider information several years ago that the game was supposed to be a launch game on PlayStation 5, and that didn't happen. So something obviously happened dramatically during the game's development over the past few years, and Street Fighter 6 full release is, you know, much later than it initially was supposed to be. What's good about that is that they already delayed the hell out of the game so that it could be given the full breadth of content that we know it has, right? They already delayed the game significantly to make sure it doesn't essentially hit the same kind of critical points that Street Fighter V did that caused Street Fighter V's launch to be an absolute disaster. And that's kind of good, right? Like the fact that Capcom is delaying the game so that they can still work on systems and work on a bunch of the single player content and work on more of the online stuff and do all of these things that you would like fighting games to hopefully get the attention of is actually not bad news, albeit disappointing, but disappointing in a way that leads to a positive net outcome. You know, the fact that the game is going to be dropping at a later date just means that you're probably going to get more polished, more functional, and better playing single player content. You're probably going to be getting just as many characters as you think you might be getting based on leaks and stuff like that could be showing up in the core roster, and they're going to be fully fleshed out and all of that shit, you know? As much as this is like, damn it, this is a bummer, like it is, it's weird to think where this stuff could potentially drop, because the scary part about this is that the Game Awards is right around the corner, right? And there's another game at the Game Awards that is literally screaming behind the scenes to be revealed. And the time frame for its reveal could potentially be laying down a very similar release window that Street Fighter 6 could be after this news, and that is NRS's announcement. And NRS has never really released a fighting game outside of like the April to May-ish time frame, like sans a week or two. They've never really released a fighting game outside of that time frame. Granted, Capcom never released a Street Fighter game outside of February. Now it seems they're doing it. So there could be an interesting conflict here, or Mortal Kombat could just be releasing in a completely different window if it is Mortal Kombat. It could be something that whatever NRS is working on could be pushed, you know? But we have to assume that based on the science of the situation, the science of how these companies work, there's a good chance NRS's game is going to be dropped around like springtime, right around April of 2023, and potentially announced at the end of this year. That would be crazy, right? It'd be crazy if there's a potential brand new like Mortal Kombat or something like that launching right next to what is Street Fighter, right? not launching next to a brand new Capcom's biggest effort, most single player filled Street Fighter game. And that feels like they're going to be in direct competition with each other, you know, which is not really good for Mortal Kombat, and it's not good for Street Fighter, right? Releasing those games in contention with each other in an already very specific market, you would like to think doesn't collide with each other, because NRS fans are NRS fans and Capcom fans are Capcom fans, but no, they definitely will be colliding, and those are two markets that will be consuming on each other, which is scary. I don't want that to happen. I want both of these games to be successful, whatever NRS is working on, and Street Fighter, you know? So, it's slightly concerning, and I would like to say that hopefully, you know, we're not going to have any worries, but it does seem like, at least from this information, the only game coming out this fiscal year is RE4 Remake from Capcom. That fiscal year ends on like March 31st. So from April forward is when Street Fighter 6 could potentially come out. And whether or not it's, you know, April all the way till 2024, I don't know. I have no idea. Things are all starting to fall into place. But the big outlier obviously is that NRS game. And will NRS's game essentially be a huge wrench into this gigantically packed potential 2023? You got to realize 2023 could be full of a new NRS game, a brand new Street Fighter, and a brand new Tekken in the same year, and that's a lot of that's a lot of consumption going on, audience consumption around everything, and potentially even big games like Project L and stuff like that. It's that's a lot happening in one year, and it's amazing. It's great for us content creators, but you know, I will say I'd prefer some fucking time in between the fighting game releases so that I can actually learn how to play one. It's already tough as shit to track and play a whole bunch of games that I really enjoy on top of fighting games. So it's almost like that's exciting. It'll be a great year for me financially, but it's going to be a fucking nightmare. That sounds like an absolute goddamn nightmare to have to deal with 3 of the biggest fighting game launches in the same year. Please no, please dear God, please do not let that shit happen. I hope there's a decent few months in between the release of all these games in some way. Yeah, at least we have a pretty good idea of where Street Fighter 6 is eventually going to lie, and it's not in the usual February time frame.